The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by Alberta Canola Producers Commission, SAS Canola, and Manitoba Canola Growers.
I'm Kelvin Hepner with Real Agriculture. We are at the University of Manitoba for this edition of the Canola School, joined by Dr. Don Flaten, soil scientist here at the U of M. And Don, we are focusing on fertilizer toxicity when seeding. Of course, canola is quite vulnerable to toxic effects from fertilizer when placed in the seed row, and especially in a year when we have dry conditions, as we are seeing in much of Western Canada this year.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Canola is one of our most sensitive crops when it comes to fertilizer injury to the seedlings. And dry weather conditions, dry soil conditions give us lots of problems because we have not much water to dilute the fertilizer. We don't have rainfall percolating through the soil to wash the fertilizer away from the seed row. And we also end up with a crop that's struggling because of poor moisture conditions to emerge, and it's more vulnerable to that kind of toxicity problem.
So there are several factors that contribute to this risk. You mentioned soil and both the texture and moisture availability determine the risk to the seed, to start with those two factors?
Yeah, I've already mentioned the factors associated with the moisture conditions, but a sandy soil will also have higher concentrations of fertilizer in the seed row than a clay soil. So, depending on your soil type or the variability from one part of a field to another part of the field, there's differences because of that soil texture as well.
Okay. Machinery and seed placement relative to where the fertilizer is being placed would be another factor?
Yeah, huge differences depending on the type of machinery that's being used to plant the crop. And what we're concerned here about is seed bed utilization. What proportion of your seed bed is actually occupied by the seed and the fertilizer? If you have a wide spacing between each row and you have a small amount of spreading behind each row, let's say with a corn planter with disc openers at 30-inch spacing, then you've got huge concentrations of fertilizer in with the seed. Whereas if you have like 6 or 8-inch row spacing and or you have spreading behind each opener, you dilute that fertilizer concentration a lot. So the type of implement that you're working with, if it's different from your neighbors, you might have an entirely different risk scenario for your seedling toxicity.
What about different fertilizer types? Of course, phosphate is what we're usually, in most cases, applying in the seed row with canola.
Yeah, I think we're trying to get the message across that it's not a good idea to put nitrogen in with the seed of canola, and we're trying to get away from putting sulfur with the canola seed row as well. The sulfate sulfur in particular is quite damaging to the seedling. Potassium or potash should not be put in with the seed row, so you're pretty much left with the phosphate. And even the phosphate can be toxic at rates above 20 pounds an acre here in Manitoba. It's increasing the probability of seedling damage quite a bit to go anything higher than 20 pounds an acre of phosphate, which is only 40 pounds of 1152 per acre.
Mm-hmm. So that 20 pounds per acre is kind of the maximum in average year. What about in a dry year? How does a producer determine how much they need to pull back that maximum level in a dry year?
No, that's a good point. And where you have a combination of risk factors like dryness and a seeder that has wide row spacings and narrow spreading behind the rows, even 20 pounds an acre can cause quite a bit of toxicity problems. We saw this a couple of years ago in Portage la Prairie for Canola Palooza. There was a demonstration that showed that even 20 pounds an acre of phosphate, which is only 40 pounds of 1152, caused significant problems when that canola was seeded at 1 foot row spacings with a double disc opener. There was still lots of toxicity, knocked that canola stand back a lot.
And another factor we haven't talked about yet is cutting back seeding rates. There's sort of a trend right now where producers are looking to save on seed costs with canola, and so only putting as much seed down as needed. That would elevate the risk as well to having yield impact from fertilizer toxicity.
Yeah, that's a good point. And if you could afford to put on twice as much seed as you actually required, then you could afford to have quite a bit of seedling toxicity and not hurt your yields at all. But nowadays, with the cost of seed where it's at, a lot of farmers trying to cut back and just put on enough seed to get that good stand for yield. And if they have any damage in terms of seedling toxicity and a reduced stand, they're vulnerable to yield losses.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully we see rain before in these dry areas before it's too late. And thanks for taking the time to share your insight with us again, Don.
Okay, well, thanks for the opportunity to have this conversation.